Hey boys and girls, I'm so glad you're here today. Today is going to be lesson 2, talking about our plane shapes. So you should have done yesterday, you should have done your plane shapes, or we learned that plane shapes are those 2D shapes that we can find normally on pictures, or we can draw. Architects use them a good bit. Well, today we're going to talk about the angles that go along with those, okay, and that we can find in our shapes. Now, I have drawn a picture of an angle. I'm going to give you a brief run through, just like I would in the classroom, okay? This is a picture of what we would call an angle, okay? You see that? An angle has 2 rays, and those 2 rays come to a meeting point. That meeting point is known as a vertex. If you have more than one, by the way, that's called vertices. Like if I have more than one cat, we would say cats. If I had more than one vertex, it would be called vertices, okay? Now, sometimes our angles come in a perfect right angle shape. I had a marker. Let me find it. If they come in a right angle shape, like the one I've shown here, you're going to see this little square here. To know that this is a perfect right angle, I've got to be able to know that this is a perfect L shape and that I could finish drawing a square, okay? So anytime you see this, just know that that is a right angle, okay? That's the most important thing you're going to see today, is to recognize that that is a right angle if you see that little square, okay? All right, now, some of our shapes we already know already have those right angle shapes, okay? Now, if I were to draw a square, if I have a square, you can tell that it has, what is this square made up of? 4 right angles, okay? But now, when I look at a triangle, I can't draw that square because it is not perfect L shapes, okay? I can't go in and put this, because if I go over, that's still not going to look like a perfect square. Okay, it's got to go straight up and down so that I can draw the other half of my square, and I can't do that here. Okay, so this is called, when I do that, see how it would normally come up this way if I needed this to be part of my square. Can you see that? I'm trying to make sure you can see this. I would need that to come up this way, okay? And since it's not coming up this way, it's actually smaller than that. And there's a term we're going to use for that. It's going to be called less than a right angle, okay? And the way that I remember that, you know how when we worked on greater than and less than in numbers, how 10 is greater than 8? The way you remember that is that 10 is bigger than 8. And then we used less than to determine that 6 is less than 8. Then our angles that are smaller than 90, or smaller than my right angle, or the 90 degrees, then that's going to be called less than a right angle, okay? So if it's bigger, it would be called greater than a right angle, and if it's smaller, it'll be called less than a right angle, okay? All right, now this funky shape down here, I want you to look at it. Do you see how it already has these drawn in? So what does that tell me? That tells me that it already has, what are those called? Right angles. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about this in our lesson, okay? So let's get started. Okay, an angle is formed by 2 rays that share an endpoint. Plane shapes have angles formed by 2 line segments that share an endpoint. The shared endpoint is called a vertex, and the plural form is vertices, okay? And then there's our example right there. Okay, now Jason drew this shape on his dot paper. How many angles are in Jason's shape? Now remember, what is an angle? It is formed by 2 rays that share an endpoint, okay? So I can already tell I could put one here. I have a ray here. I have a ray here. And I have a ray here. So I have 1 angle, 2 angle, 3, 4 angles. So how many angles do we have altogether? 4. Okay. All right. Now we're going to try to describe these angles a little bit more. Now this is Jason's shape. They've just redrawn it each time to talk about a different angle. Okay. Now right here it says this mark, which we already talked about, this little mark right here, tells us that it is a right angle. It says a right angle is an angle that forms a square corner. So in other words, it forms a perfect square, okay? And this one right here, you can tell, if I were to use this on the bottom as part of my square and I wanted to come up, it didn't come over far enough, did it? So I can tell that this one is known as less than a right angle because it is smaller, okay? It's smaller than I needed that leg right there to be, to draw my square. Now this one up here, I'm actually going to turn this upside down so you can tell a little bit better. Uh-oh, can you tell already? I can already tell. Alright, now if I was going to use this to be, because this is my angle right here. I've got my two rays right here. So this is my angle, okay? Now if I were going to draw a square, I could use this and go over, but I would need it to come more this way. You see that? So it is a little bit bigger, or how would we word that? It is greater than a right angle, okay? So now let's talk about his shape a little bit more. It says that two angles are what kind of angles? They marked that for us right here. What are those two angles known as? Two angles are right angles. Okay? Now let's go to the next drawing. How many angles could you find that are less than a right angle? How many angles did he have that were less than a right angle? He only had one. And if we look right here at the last one, we can tell how many did he have that were greater than a right angle. He only had one. Okay? So that's what we're going to talk about today. All these angles. Okay? Alright. Now, this one right here says how many angles are in the triangle to the right. Now remember, you need two lines coming from the same point to make an angle. Remember, that's our definition. Two rays that share an end point. So in other words, I need two lines that come together. So I have a line here and a line here, and they're sharing this corner. So there's one. Let's go down here. I've got this line and this line sharing this corner. So there's two. And then I have this top line and this line that are sharing this corner. So how many angles did I just find? 3. Alright. Now we are going to look at the corner that they have shown us, and we're going to tell if the angle that they have drawn for us is a right angle, is it less than a right angle, or is it greater than a right angle, okay? So we're going to have to do some digging and look at these angles really closely, okay? Now, if I look at this one right here, I want you to use this. You can always pick, I always pick the bottom one, you know, if the angle's down towards the bottom. If I use this bottom one and I want to make a perfect square, this one's got to go straight up to make a perfect square. Did this one go straight up? It did not. So what would this be called? That is greater than a right angle. And I'm just going to write greater than, okay? I'm going to kind of abbreviate this a little bit. All right, now let's look at this one. For this shape, they want us to look at this corner right here. Now, you know how I am. I want it to be on the bottom, and it's not. So I'm going to flip this over. Now, if I use this as my bottom, then to make a perfect square, whoop, it almost did, but it's not quite there. It's a little bit smaller. And what do we call it if it's a little bit smaller? We say it is less than a right angle. Now remember how I told you to remember what this little L-shaped drawing in the corner meant. When they have finished the square for us, that means that that is a right angle. Okay, so that one's pretty easy. Okay. Now, let's look at these together. It says, write how many of each type of angle that each shape has. So let's look at this shape at the top. Kind of looks like a little barn to me. Okay. How many right angles can you spot? Remember, they kind of help us out because I already see those little drawings that they do to finish my square. How many of those do you see? There are 3 right angles. Now, that took out this one. We've covered this angle, and this angle. Now, can you tell how many angles are left? I still have 2 angles left because I have 2 corners with the rays, okay? So now let's look at these. All right, now if I make this my bottom, and I want to make a perfect square, goodness gracious, look how that almost made a flat line. So what would that be called, since it's so much bigger than the right angle should have been? That would be greater than. So here's a greater than angle. And then on this side, I'm going to do the same thing. Oop. See how much bigger that was? Oop, I'm sorry, you can't see. See how much bigger that was when I try to draw my right angle? Right there. So what's that called? That's another greater than. So I have a greater than and a greater than, and that's all of my angles. So I have 2 on this shape that are greater than. So that means how many less than a right angles did we have? 0. We didn't have any in that shape. All right, let's look at number 6 together. All right, let's look right up here. Now, I can already tell looking at this what these are. Can you tell just by looking? I hope you're getting to where you can kind of tell just by looking, okay? Now, do I see any of these little markings that tell me I have right angles? I don't. So I know none of these are going to be right angles. They're either going to be less than a right or greater than a right. So let's look at these 2 bottom ones first, okay? Now, if I were to use my bottom and I try to make a perfect square, oh, I can't do that here, see? I can't do that. Look right here. Is that smaller than my right angle, or is it greater than and a little bit too big? That's smaller than, so that's going to be less than a right angle there. Let's check this one. All right, I'm going to draw my square. I'm going to go straight up. Now, is that one going to be greater than or less than? That's going to be another less than angle. So I've got 2 angles taken care of. Now, let's flip this paper over. I'm going to make sure you actually can see it. There we go. Okay. Now, I'm going to try again. I'm going to use the bottom and I'm going to go straight up. Uh-oh. Now, is that going to be less than or greater than? That one is greater. So what do you think this side will be? Since this is a mirror image, why don't you predict what you think this one will be? I'm going to go ahead and start. You be predicting what you think it's going to be. There's my right angle, and it is greater. So I want you to notice something, boys and girls. When I have a mirror image like this, in other words, if I were to take this and fold it in half, if I were able to do that, I should have the same angle on this side as I do this one, as long as they're exact, like a perfect square would be. That's kind of what happened over here too. Okay, now we got to plug it in on our paper. So how many less thans did we have? We had 1, 2. And how many greater thans did we have? 1, 2. Good job. Okay. All right, number 7. Uh-oh, they have already fixed this for us. I want you to notice something. Every single angle has that sign in it. So what does that mean? A square has all the same angles, and every angle is a right angle, okay? So we have none that are less than a right and none that are greater than a right. Okay? And the same thing here. If I were able to cut this shape out, and if I were going to fold it in half, this would be a mirror image. Okay, so this right angle goes right along with this one, and this right angle goes right along with this one. As long as your image is exactly the same on this side as it is on the other, then you should have the same thing on the opposite side. Now look at our problem from the previous page. Let me find it. Remember that about Jason and his shape? This one, that wouldn't work. Because if I were to cut this in half, this is not a mirror image. So that wouldn't apply to this kind of shape. But if your shape is exactly the same on all sides, and it's a mirror image that we could fold in half and it looked the same on both sides, then it should match the opposite side, okay? Alright, so this is going to be your on your own work today, okay? Sorry if you can't see it really well. I'm trying to fix it in here. You're going to do problems 8 through 13 on your own, okay? So if you want to go ahead and get you a sheet of paper, you can go ahead and get a sheet of paper and be making notes and answering it, so that all you have to do is plug it into your Google Classroom, or you can look at the picture inside Google Classroom. But since you're here, you could go ahead and press pause and just go ahead and answer these questions for me. On number 8, 9, and 10, you're going to tell me whether the angle is a right angle, less than a right, or greater than a right, okay? Now, you only have to tell me about the corner that they have the blue lines in, okay? So only tell me about that corner, okay? Now, down at the bottom, you're going to write how many of each type of angle there is for each shape, okay? Just like we did at the top, okay? So down here, you're going to tell me how many right angles there are, how many less than a right, and how many greater than a right angles there are for each of these shapes, okay? It's not too bad. That's all you're going to have to do is problems 8 through 13, and then submit those in Google Classroom, okay? I enjoyed working with you guys today. Don't forget to submit these on Google Classroom. You only have problems 8 through 13. So make sure that you do your work, okay, and then hit submit. If you have any questions or there was one you were a little confused about, you can always go in and type me a message that says, I got confused on this. Can you show me how to do it, okay? If y'all need anything, just let me know. I miss you guys and I love you. Bye-bye.